state data shows that LGBTQ people are overrepresented relative to our percentage of the general population in facing and being victims of bias incidents, including hate crimes. For 2016, which is the most recent year, as we heard earlier, that we have an Attorney General's report out of the state of New Jersey on bias crimes. As we heard, there were 417 total incidents. 50 of those were on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, meaning that those were incidents who targeted people who either are members of the LGBTQ community or were perceived by their attackers to be members of that community. And relative to the total 417 incidents, that puts the LGBT community at about 12% of the total bias incidents for the state of New Jersey in that most recent report. And I think in looking at that number, it's important to understand that the population of the state of New Jersey, the LGBTQ population, has been estimated at around 4.1% by the Williams Institute at UCLA, which is a world-renowned center for study of LGBTQ issues and population. And so there's a vast overrepresentation there. That overrepresentation carries over at the federal level. Rachel Wainer-Raptor mentioned the 15.9% on sexual orientation. When you add gender identity, it was around 17.6% of total hate crimes reported to the FBI in 2017 that were based on actual or perceived sexual orientation and or gender identity. It's important to note that that's an increase of 17% in reported hate crimes total from the previous year. And also to think about, I think one of the things you really need to think about when you're looking at this with respect to LGBTQ population, as with other populations like the immigrant community, is that these numbers are underreported, right? And so one of the reasons is that hate crime reporting, as we've heard, is not mandatory. And so the numbers undercount likely significantly the reality of these bias-motivated crimes. Indeed, like many other states, New Jersey actually has not reported any data on gender identity to the FBI since the FBI began collecting hate crime data related to gender identity in 2013. And yet, while they have, we've reported no data on gender identity, New Jersey did report 51 incidents based on actual or perceived sexual orientation in 2017, which is an increase of almost 50% from the 34 incidents reported in 2016, the 33 reported in 2015, and the 32 reported in 2014. So you can kind of see that trend again. Over the past couple of years prior to 2016, you were seeing around 34 reports based on sexual orientation out of New Jersey, and then that number jumped almost 50% to 51 incidents for 2017. In addition to the fact that reporting is not mandated, other factors such as stigma that still attaches to LGBTQ identity, the fear of being outed, and historically poor relationships and trust between the LGBTQ community and law enforcement also contribute significantly to undercounting of bias incidents and hate crimes against LGBTQ persons. In 2015, the National Center for Transgender Equality released the U.S. Transgender Survey, which is the largest survey ever conducted of the United States transgender population with over 27,000 respondents. They did a breakout report for the state of New Jersey, which found that respondents in our state reported high levels of harassment and mistreatment by police officers, and of New Jersey respondents, transgender respondents who interacted with police or law enforcement in the year prior to the survey, 66% stated they had experienced some form of mistreatment when the officer knew they were transgender. That included verbal harassment, repeatedly being referred to as the wrong gender, physical assault, and even sexual assault. 55% of transgender New Jersey respondents said they would feel uncomfortable asking the police for help if they needed it. And that data is similar to other members of the LGBTQ community, so not just the trans community. For instance, a 2013 report on anti-LGBTQ violence found that of LGBTQ violence survivors who had interacted with the police in the past year, 48% nationally reported police misconduct, including unjustified arrest and use of excessive force and entrapment. The point is that that leads to reduced reporting of crimes by the LGBTQ community. The same report found that only 56% of LGBTQ survivors of hate violence had reported such incidents to the police. And I think it's important to note that historically, same-sex attraction and behavior, cross-gender identification and expression have been criminalized in the United States. It's a long history extending from colonial laws in which same-sex relations were punishable by death to the Supreme Court's decision in Lawrence v. Texas, which is only 2003, in which anti-sodomy laws were finally declared unconstitutional. Beyond that, 16 states kept those laws to this day on books, basically stating, wanting to send a message of moral disapproval, and that is well within, right, the sort of living memory of the LGBTQ community. It contributes to this issue of mistrust of law enforcement, and I think you really, when you're thinking about reporting and hate crime statistics and bias incident statistics for that community, that history of mistrust has to be mentioned, and it is one of the things that maybe we could address. In addition to distinguishing, kind of as I did earlier, between sexual orientation and gender identity incidents, I think it's really also important to note the role that race and racism have played, and they continue to play in bias and hate crimes that are based on actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. And so by saying that, what I mean is that the victim of the vast majority of LGBTQ-related hate crimes and bias crimes are LGBTQ people of color, and in particularly are Black LGBTQ people and communities. So in 2016, the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs issued a 20th anniversary report, LGBTQ and HIV-related hate violence in 2016. In that report, and this is the year that the Pulse nightclub tragedy happened, so they have to kind of like extract that data out. But in that report, they found that of the 28 LGBTQ non-Pulse nightclub-related homicides, so apart from the tragedy at Pulse, 79% of the victims were people of color, and that is similar, it tracks with previous years, where LGBTQ people of color have been vastly overrepresented in these bias incidents. I think it's also important to note that of the non-Pulse related homicides that year, 68% were transgender people, and more specifically, 61% of the total homicides of LGBTQ people that year, excluding Pulse, were transgender women of color. I would like to conclude by referencing our own Garden State Equality's own data for the 2018 year, which has shared that incident report with you. In 2018, through our report discrimination feature on our website, we received 51 reports, so actually quite similar to the data that New Jersey reported in terms of the number of reports. However, in contrast to the reporting that law enforcement did, what was almost entirely sexual orientation, we saw this about half sexual orientation, half gender identity. So thinking about where these reports come from and where the organization is situated and how folks are reporting, right? Where they feel they can report, where they feel they can't. And when we break those incidents down, they happened primarily in schools, 30%, employment, or general harassment, healthcare, housing, prisons and policing, and public accommodations. And I want to just pause and really briefly, I know that it's been a long day, and just say, sitting here hearing the testimony, what I didn't include here, but I think is relevant, is that a lot of the flavor of that reporting was similar to what I'm hearing other organizations speak to and other advocates speak to, which is that we did see a couple of reports last year that involved not only homophobic language, but anti-Semitic language. We saw at least one incident that comes to mind in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, where a couple had been harassed on the basis of being a gay male couple, and then someone left, this woman who had been harassing them and making homophobic statements also left Trump campaign paraphernalia outside their door repeatedly. And so sort of some of the similar flavor. So given what I highlighted here today, right, which is the significant level of underreporting that we believe goes on in the LGBTQ community, the historic issues with law enforcement that have contributed to that, the types and locations of those offenses, and the role that intersectionality, race, and racism have played,